The following presentation is brought to you by Parousia. Please stay tuned at the end for more information about the many fine resources available from Parousia. In this audio-only podcast, we listen to Father Gregory Jordan's talk, Lex Orandi Lex Credendi. As we worship, so we believe.
Lex Orandi Lex Credendi. I'm amazed somebody came with just a Latin title like that put up there. Yeah, pretty game. We call it Lex Orandi as the short title given to this famous axiom derived from Pope Celestine I, who governed 422 to 32, and who wrote Legem Credendi statuit Lex Orandi. Literally, the law that governs our praying, that is the liturgy, is also the law that governs our believing, that is what we believe. It's saying that the Church's liturgy is the most effective means of preserving the true faith and of interpreting it. So, there are in this axiom, this aphorism or tag, as it has become, two elements, prayer and belief. And Pope Celestine is saying that there's a relationship between the two. But before we go on, there was another man, Prosper of Aquitaine, well known, in the same century. And he put it this way, in my translation: let's look at the prayer and the sacraments of priests. They are handed down by the apostles, and they are now celebrated in the entire world and in every Catholic church uniformly. So that the law of praying tells you the law of believing. You can find out what the Church believes by looking at the way in which it worships. That's very, very useful. There are two forms of that. Well, let's go back a stage further. In the right of... It's just done here. It's a recidivist. Been here in the last one. In the rite of reception into full communion with the Catholic Church, a baptized Christian, Protestant or Orthodox, the candidate has to make this declaration: I believe and profess all that the Holy Catholic Church believes, teaches, and proclaims to be revealed by God. Marvelous, sacred moment. Crossing that threshold into the church. The change in life. Some of you have done that, I know. And the priest says in return, Alphonsus, or whatever it is, the Lord receives you into the Catholic Church. His loving kindness has led you thus far. So that in the unity of the Holy Spirit, you may have full communion with us in the faith that you have professed in the presence of this family. Note, the unity and the communion in question is unity in the faith. The Latin word fides. And fideo, I trust. It's linked with the word trust. And belief is intimately bound up with the act of trusting. You trust another who informs you. It's not because you have witnessed something, because you believe the witness, that you accept that as a truth. And our theological virtue of faith is closely allied with that of hope. Our word confident, fides, is in that middle of that Latin word. It's included faith in it. And the Greek word is pretty well the same. Pistuo, in the Greek, it means believe, but really it's trust. So faith in the one word covers all that extended and marvellous proclamation of faith made by the candidate, I believe, profess, and so on. The next question is, what did God reveal, and where do we find it? First, the what. It's all the truths necessary for our salvation. That and nothing else. He didn't reveal, for instance, that the earth is round. And it's not necessary for salvation to believe that. Just as well, there would have been very few in from the first millennium, other and a half. It's, when you get to heaven, you're going to meet a whole lot of flat earthers, you know. You're going to have some interesting discussions. When did you learn, that the earth was round? But don't be too cocky, because, our posterity may well discover whole lots of things that we don't believe in now or don't know. And they'll think us pretty dumb that we didn't know it. So, then God chooses the weak to confound the strong and the foolish to confound the wise, says Paul. So the what the church believes in begins in God, in the Trinity, looking down on the human race, so simple, so ignorant of God. And they decide that God's eternal Son would go down on earth and actually become a man like us. In all things, sin alone excepted, as we read, to reveal to us those truths necessary for salvation. For the generations that will follow Christ's return to the Father, he establishes his church, which will never die. The gates of hell, that means the forces of death, the gates of hell will never prevail against it, he says to Peter, now called a rock, instead of Cephas. So he's revealed those truths, and he's sealed them with the Spirit in the church, and he's given the church the authority and the command to the apostles at the very end to teach all nations all I have commanded you. That is the what that the church believes. Not all those other things like the round nature of the earth or, nuclear theories and things of that, relativity. Question number 2, where do we find it? Well, first in the Bible, of course. Second, in the creeds, which were the creedal formulae, whether the Nicene or the apostles, were the symbol of faith used at baptism of pagans. So they were used either for those baptisms or as a rebuttal of the heresies occurring in the church, hence the word consubstantial. Don't let me hear anybody complaining about consubstantial. That's made its appearance again in the language of the liturgy. But the third is precisely the third source where we find that what of all those truths. We find it in the liturgy. Pope Celestine saying, if you want to find out what the church believes and teaches and proclaims, go to the text of the liturgy and study that. But not only just to read it, not just a reading of the text in your study, but also to live a celebration of the liturgy. And you will discover in that living of it, that active participation, what the church believes and teaches was revealed by God. Go to the Roman canon, the first Eucharistic prayer, the text used every day by every priest in Europe practically in the Mass for 1400 years or more. I don't know if anywhere else in human history that sort of thing has occurred. What a phenomenon. And when and of course it becomes a foundation stone of the Western civilization. And when the Liturgical Reform Commission submitted its draft text to Pope Paul VI in 69 or so for his approval, he found that Roman canon had been suppressed. It was just cut out. And it was replaced with the other canons that we also have, 2, 3, and 4, and various other ones, children's and reconciliation ones, in the Novus Ordo. He told the chairman, Archbishop Annibale Bugnini, put it back. He did. So, an exercise of the chair of Peter's authority, eh? Saving us from something not very pleasant at all. And it's still here today in the Novus Ordo as the Eucharistic prayer number 1, the Roman canon. Here more than anywhere was an example of that other great saying from the patristic era, quod ubique et ab omnibus creditur, and so on. What is believed and taught everywhere and by everyone is the Catholic faith. And that was the Roman canon. And it was the authority of the Holy Father, the See of Peter, that restored it. So what Celestine is saying is, if you want to find out what the Church teaches and believes, don't go to Google. Go to Mass. Attend Mass. Participate in Mass as far as you possibly can. The text will tell you what the Church believes, but also the entire liturgy enacted by priests, ministers, and people who kneel, rise, bow, genuflect, sing, pray in silence, pray in unison with one voice, go to receive our Lord in Holy Communion devoutly, and devoutly does reflection afterwards. This tells an honest inquirer what we believe. Somebody has told me of how, after years as a baptized child who'd never been in, but knowing was something missing, he met someone who went to Mass, and a stranger, and the next weekend, all weekend, he knew he had to go to attend Mass, and he walked in, and he knew immediately this was it. And this is an absolutely superb book, by the way. So he begins in the Bible, of course, and he goes back to that moment when liturgy truly began, in the confrontation between Moses and Pharaoh. Oh yes, you'd have sacrifices before, but wait to see what happens. Originally, God's command for Pharaoh was, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness, in the desert. It's repeated with slight variations at 4 times in all the discussions, the robust interchanges between Pharaoh and Moses, boosted by the plagues that went on after each session they had. Aaron had to have, So you have the Exodus. Pharaoh agreed to let them sacrifice to their God in the first instance, but in Egypt. No, said Moses, we've got to go into the wilderness. No. Out you go. Door closed, first set of plagues. Back in again, this time, all right, the men can go. But no, I want the women, the children, and the goats, and the pigs. Oh, no pigs are there, sorry. I'm Irish. Irish ass. So, out the door, more plagues. Betty comes and says, Pharaoh, yes, can I talk to you? All right. And he says, this time, can we go? And Pharaoh says, very well, but the men, the women, and the children can go, but the cattle, the herds have got to stay here. No good. Out you go. So finally, more plagues, and that finishes it off. Pharaoh says, you can go. And out they go, and of course, the Egyptians are drowned in the Red Sea, just in the nick of time. And they can go into the desert, whereas to serve God, worship him, in a way that God is going to show them. Moses won't let Pharaoh impose his restrictions on God's will for worship. And so Pharaoh's left with only one option. The whole lot of them are allowed to go. We don't know what we will worship the Lord with until we get there, he says. So the flocks of herds have got to go too. The dominant concern in the liturgy here at its very beginning is not the promised land. They spent 40 years getting there. But the execution of the liturgy as God willed them, and as God will show them, without political intervention of any kind whatsoever. So the Israelites go in order to serve God in the wilderness. The promised land will be part and parcel of where and how God is to be worshipped, the details of which are yet to be seen way in the future. Hasn't been revealed yet. The promised land is not the ultimate purpose of the Exodus. We'll see how. Oh, the land is there from the very beginning in the promise to Abraham. Go to a land that I will show you. The word land is there. Soil, earth. And it's an issue worldwide, of course. And it was there at the very beginning, is it not, in that promise? And it's not go to a land you can find for yourself. That would reduce them to any of the warring tribes looking for a place in the sun. And that's not God's, with their periodic migrations. No, with Israel, the initiative was always with God. Right, 3 months out of Egypt, they're camped before Sinai. God comes down on the mountain, Exodus 19, 16, and 20, and speaks to the people, revealing to them his will in 2 spheres that are fundamental. He gives them the 10 commandments to govern their daily lives, and through Moses, he makes a covenant with the people. That covenant is expressed in detailed form of worship, the very purpose of their exodus. In the book of Deuteronomy, it's spelled out chapter after chapter after chapter in detail. And that's what they study and keep to in the worship of the temple once they get to build it or rebuild it, as we'll hear. And so that is the primordial meaning of Lex Orandi Lex Credendi. God's will, which we believe and accept, and then express in our worship, in our liturgy. It's their acceptance of God's revelation through Moses. That is, their belief in what is God's will that determines the way they pray. That is, the way they worship God, kill their sacrifices, or offer the incense, use the blood, and they have expiated various sacrifices of praise or worship, morning, evening, all of that. It governs the day, governs their whole life, and sanctifies it, as it is, of course, the case for us in the New Testament. So, at this early stage, they're not within an ass's bray of the promised land. That's 40 years in the future. But Sinai and its desert constitutes them God's people, both interiorly in their faith and exteriorly in their life, according to the commandments and according to the covenants and all the directions of worship. Once they fall away from the covenant of Sinai, as will happen, even though they are established on the promised land, they'll lose it, because they'll cease to be God's people. And they'll fall away to believe, as St. Paul says, in fables. They'll return to fables, he warns Timothy, heaping to themselves teachers having itching ears. And the end result is they lose the land. And they lose, first of all, 10 tribes. Where are they out of the 12? Gone forever. Nobody knows. They thought they'd be in Ethiopia in the age of discovery. They think they're over in China. Certain Chinese they look at and they think they can see certain distinctions. Oh, they're very opposite. You think most of them have got rotten noses. So, whatever. But they go through this trying to find the 10 tribes. They're all lost. They're leaving only Benjamin and Judah. So they are the remnant. And the remnant of those two tribes, a remnant of a remnant now, the ones who weren't slaughtered, murdered, they're taken into exile up in Babylon, and there they lament because we have no prince, no priest, no altar, no sacrifice. The Torah is lost to them. All the beauty of the temple, doing God's will. But so they're compelled to live Sinai interiorly, as do Tobit and Sarah when they marry. Beautiful. They remember what God's will is. And as does Susanna, she lives chastely, according to God's law. But not 40 years ahead, but 70, they return to that promised land providentially to find a copy of the Torah preserved, immured in the broken down wall of the temple. They summoned all the people and they read it all the morning to the people. And the people were in tears. And they start again to rebuild Israel out of their belief. The tears of gratitude drive their energy to recreate the holy city, where once again he'll be worshipped according to God's will. All that lies in Israel's future at this stage at Sinai, but it's their belief always that drives them. Meanwhile, it's worth noting, what did Benedict say? The church of the future will be a considerably reduced church, but it will be more fervent. The apostasy. Back to Sinai at its desert. Moses goes up the mountain to learn how the people are to serve God from God's own direction, his own voice. And we heard about that. And what do the people do? Well, they yawn, they wait around, they scratch themselves, and they'll check their watch, and there's no sign of him coming around the mountain. So what do? They form a liturgy committee. Don't you think that's a bit naughty? And what do they decide to do? Let's have a golden calf. Come on, earrings, everybody, all your bangles and the rest. Put them in the pot and boil it up, and we've got a mould here. We're going to make a golden calf, as big as we can make it. And so they get to work around the calf, and they have their liturgy. Note, here you are. And they say, here, Israel is the God of Israel who brought you up out of Egypt. They say that. You know, it's simply obscene that. Did the calf send the plagues? Did the calf confront Pharaoh? Did the calf drown the Egyptian army providentially? Of course not. And this is what they are saying. And there is your God, Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. In the face of this affront to Yahweh, what does Aaron do, the high priest? Well, he says, tomorrow we're going to have a feast in honor of Yahweh. It's not what he says, it's what he doesn't say. He doesn't step in and correct as Paul VI did, insisting that the first Eucharistic prayer be retained in the Novus Order, in the Reformed liturgy. And from time to time, other publications have come out, other statements from the Vatican, to correct, to encourage, to enlighten. So, he doesn't say, Aaron, this is an effigy of Yahweh, thank God. He doesn't go that far. The people are saying that. But it's what Aaron doesn't say that's important. And what he says is orthodox. Tomorrow we're going to have a feast in honor of Yahweh. That's okay. But he finishes up presiding over heteropraxis, not orthopraxis. That is, heterodox action, heresy, inaction in a liturgy. So there's 100% clash between the two. The people aren't sure really what to do. They offered holocausts, they brought in communion sacrifices. That's a terrible expression. And then all the people sat down to eat and drink. And then afterwards, they got up to amuse themselves. Aaron says the feast is in honor of Yahweh. The people saying, the calf, your God, who brought you out of Egypt. Mixed messages. And it is at least the beginning of an apostasy. Yahweh sees it for what it is and tells Moses, your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, he's disclaiming any. Don't tell them they're mine, sort of stuff. They've apostatized. That they've been quick to leave the way marked out for them. There are several chapters of God's instructions as to how they should worship in Deuteronomy that Moses has given them. They've made themselves a calf of molten metal and they've worshipped it and offered it sacrifice. Here is your God and so on. They've cried out. That is, they chant that. And so God is singularly displeased. Moses is appalled. What they've done is revert to pagan practices. The psalm later on says, you know what happens. Later on the kings, they run out of Jewish wives and they take pagan ones and concubines. And they have lots of worries being in charge of the country. That's always the case. The deed polls are saying they're unpopular. And so and the enemy is mashing on the north front. What are we going to do? Come, says one of the concubines or one of the pagan wives. Come up to the hilltop at midnight and we'll kill a chook and we'll put blood on your wood. All these silly things they do. And you'll be right. You'll see. Just if you do what we tell you to do. And they're so worried and so anxious that they go along and follow it. It's anxiety that drives people to go to tarot card people and fortune tellers and things of that, silly things of that nature, or let alone get out a Ouija board. Don't touch a thing of all. They're all condemned, of course, in the Catholic Catechism. Well, Moses rebukes them. I think the golden calf is destroyed, and there's a reconciliation. The covenant is renewed, and a pattern is set that's going to go on. I forgot to say, talking of what happened in later generations, the Psalm says they even sacrificed their own children. Beat that. They reverted to pagan sacrifice of their own children, not of just chooks and things. Doves. Of course, these days you can abort a child, but if you maltreat the doves or your dogs, you'll be sued and can even be jailed as a result of that organisation, RSPCA. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that in the past 50 years, we've seen an apostasy in the church, especially the Western church. The statistics for mass attendance in Australia have slumped from something approaching 70% down to 13%. in some cases 10% of census Catholics, that is, Catholics who every 5 years tick the box saying Catholic, or Roman Catholic if you like. And last year there was another mass count, but the results have not yet been published. I wonder where they're going to fit, where the needle's going to fall and stop with this one. May well be below the 13%. Well, we live in hopes of the graph doing a hockey stick and coming up again, and a reconciliation occurring. And a lot of things are necessary for that. How did this happen, this dramatic turnaround, which dashed the hopes of the Vatican II era, focused especially on the vernacular Mass facing the people, priest facing the people? Well, nowadays, because of the shortage of priests, very often it's the liturgy of the word facing the people, not a Mass. And this Mass, which was thought to be so people-friendly and would hold them in and would attract more, is the one precisely that has lost the people. It was not the traditional extraordinary form of the Roman Rite which lost them. That had already disappeared itself. It was off the bill, effectively, though it is, of course, well and truly coming back. Now, what do we derive from the events of the founding of Israel at Sinai that shed light on our worship in the 21st century? Above all, the truth appears that it must be our belief that governs our worship. On the other hand, if our worship is wonky, it will rob our belief of its bite, and we will start to lose our grip and our vigor as believing Catholics. The original liturgical direction is the command of Jesus, "Do this in memory of me." To the first Christians, they obeyed it. They held the breaking of the bread in their own homes. The liturgy grew out of the Lord's sacred command. It also grew out of the Jewish liturgy of the Word. And to a degree, the sacrifice in the temple. The liturgy of the Word was in the synagogues. No sacrifices there. There was only up in the temple. And in his spirit of the liturgy, Cardinal Ratzinger brilliantly brings the two, shows how the two are brought together in the sacrifice of the Mass. And I've been told about the laws that govern our liturgy, they're man-made. You know, for instance, if you object to intinction of that is the communicant coming up with the host and dipping it in because they don't want to pick up somebody else's infections, and they think this is the best way to avoid it. A, it's forbidden. B, in their fist goes. C, how far down do they put the host? And does it go into the precious blood? And none of us have got absolutely perfect nails. We could all do with an examination of conscience and also with fingernails. And under a microscope, it's not a pretty sight. So, there is an example. They say made man. Yes, but what did our Lord say to the apostles? Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Like no longer being obliged to, that's time, being obliged to fast, not so fast, but abstain on a Friday, things of that nature. Probably a bad move. Do you know that in England they're bringing it back in? The United Kingdom? Yeah. So there's much more, but it's better come back next year or something like that. So I'll wind up there, but it comes down to the Church's authority, and you will find that beautifully described in this book by an Australian. This is a key work on the liturgy. It is the organic development of the liturgy by Alcuin Reid, OSB. He was a Melbourneite, a convert to Catholicism, was ordained a deacon, but left. He went over to London and went and joined the Benedictine Abbey at Farnborough, St. Michael's, and continued his scholarly work there and brought that book out. I don't think he was ordained, but eventually he left there. His name, in fact, is Scott, and under that name there was an earlier one, A Bitter Trial, like nice slim volume, Evil and War, and John Cardinal Heenan on the liturgical changes. Brilliant. So that's Reid. At the end of the book, his conclusion is, it is the organic development, not sudden, jerky changes of direction in the liturgy, that's to be approved, and always under the authority of the See of Peter, of the Bishop.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation brought to you by Parousia. Parousia is an Australian-based apostolate bringing you the best in Catholic formation resources. Visit the website at www.parousiamedia.com. Thank you for listening, and may God richly bless you and your family.